What dark secret are you hiding from everyone? My stepdad tried to KL me when I was little. My stepdad was a great asshole. He was in my life from the beginning after my bio dad up and left till I was about 13-14. He was an abusive alcoholic jobless dickwad who constantly physically and verbally abused both my mom and I. On multiple occasions either my mom or I called the cops and watched them drag the sorry sack of shit out the house and throw him in jail for a couple of days. They were sadly the happiest days of my childhood. When I was little I can remember countless times where I had gotten into physical fights with the man resulting in black eyes, cuts, bruises, the works. I won't go into detail any further since it's kinda hard to talk about, but I will say this. I never told anyone about this. This is the first time I've gotten it down in writing or out in the open at all. When I was little 5 to 6 years old, I'd say I lived with my mom and stepdad in my stepdad's parents' attic. My mom frequently went out during the day for work and didn't come home till late evening or night. Well, one day after my parents had a pretty hostile argument, my mom left for work and my dad was pretty pent up. This is what I remember and continue to remember almost every day since the event. My dad took one of those large heavy-duty trash bags out of his parents' kitchen, dragged me into the living room of the attic, stuffed me in the bag, and tied it after letting out some air. I remember being terrified, too scared to act out of fear of getting hit or yelled at. I waited till I heard him close the attic door, then proceeded to use my fingers to claw a hole through the trash bag. I remember it taking a while since I wasn't that strong at the time due to malnourishment and well my age, but I eventually made it out and laid on the floor just waiting for my mom to get home. I don't know if she knows what happened, if she just thought I was playing with the trash bag or what, but that's what I remember and I've been carrying it for years. Thankfully, she eventually left that dirt bag, and I can now happily say, I have an amazing father who I love very much, so this story does have a happy ending. Thanks for reading my little vent. I'm kinda terrified to post this, but getting it out finally will do me some good. They literally said please. That's a request, not a demand. I can appreciate you trying to stand in the corner of those who have suffered injustices, to put it kindly, but some level of forethought in how you do so would be more impactful. Conflict resolution is generally more effective when it doesn't begin with some level of hostility. Why do you assume the victim who has never spoken about this to anyone knows all the possible alternatives available? Maybe it was direct, but encouraging someone to get therapy after a traumatic event is always a good idea. If you read this, understand that therapy can be something formal, which requires payment, but also something which can be done with other family members, counselors, or friends. People who claim to be your friends, but can't provide you with meaningful objective feedback, aren't really your friends and individuals you should be going to in the first place when you need help. The idea that a stranger will solve our problems with an objective lens when they are only getting a subjective understanding of our lifestyle provided by our own biased narratives is ridiculous. Who better to understand your problems and needs than the people around you? Again, if you can't rely on these people because you fear they are self-interested, then find another group of people. But the idea that someone needs to be licensed to lend someone an ear and provide them with meaningful, healing, constructive advice is just not something that's true. There may be research studies indicating the opposite, but what sort of therapist would put their job security on the line and tell you, hey, you know what, if you have these conversations with your family or some other person you'll be just fine. Whether you want to admit it to yourself or not, there is an economic incentive at hand in therapy which is exploited by people who claim to have the requisite training v those that don't. I won't be the first to say that having a degree or license in something doesn't make you qualified for that position. I know people who have had horrible experiences with their therapists, just like I know people who have really benefited from it. In the end, it has nothing to do with being a professional and everything to do with being an empathetic human willing to do anything to provide comfort to someone in distress. I respectfully dissent. I was trapped in a manipulative, toxic environment till I was in my 22nd, and now still affected by PTSD. You can get PTSD from things you don't think affected you as bad as the PTSD, but can subconsciously control your habits, thinking, trust, eating, sleeping, etc. For me, if built up on top of my anxiety, depression, and sobriety struggle, then they hit me hard. I locked myself in my room and just did psychedelics for 6 months until I finally went to a mental health facility which helped me enter society and just cope, and change my views to be more open-minded and remember that everyone in life is just doing the best they can with what they were given, some being knowledge, money, experience, relationships, and location. If I think that around strangers, I'm more positive towards myself and them. If we can succeed through struggle and flourish, it makes it that much more meaningful to me than being born happy or wealthy, though. If you are born happy or both, then that's great. Listen man, just at the fact you've never spoke of this and have a hard time writing it down and fear of posting it is a sign. This kind of trauma can manifest in strange and negative way later in life. I'm 38 and it affects every aspect of my life. I've spent all that time saying why would I want to go to therapy and relive those things, but I do relive them just alone, go through periods of completely withdrawing from the world, like completely. I don't answer the phone, watching through the window when they knock until they leave, to periods of anger and self-pity to self-hate for letting it affect me and using it as an excuse for all things I've failed out in life. Seek help, maybe talk to your new loving dad, or if not, when you're old enough to make that choice for yourself. Don't give that monster any more power over your life. As I say this to you, I know I still won't. Don't be like me. Of course, I would encourage you to get a good therapist first. But if you don't do that, then find another outlet. Write it down, what happened, how you feel about it, and anyone involved. Write them letters. You don't have to mail them, just write them so you can express your feelings and thoughts. And yes, I do mean, lay it out with pen and paper. Writing it is more cathartic than typing it is. Also, paper, you can burn it all later so that no one else can see it if that is what you want to do. I actually became agoraphobic because of PTSD from abuse of childhood and early adulthood. This was one of the things both my therapist and psychiatrist told me to do. It helped so much. You are not me, obviously, so it may not work as well, but it is certainly worth trying if you don't wish to seek therapy. Hopefully life gets better for you soon. This seriously broke my heart. I have 4 kids, one of them a 4-year-old sweet little boy. To think of having some nasty trash BF abuse him and then beat him and stuff him in a trash bag to suffocate him alone and scared. I'm sorry, your mom should have done better. You deserved better. I'm so sorry you had to experience that. I'm glad you are doing better and feel loved today. I hope you create a happy life for yourself. My mom has a piece of shitty ex-husband who used to do stuff like that. People who think that their kids are not affected by domestic violence that they witness are sadly misinformed. I saw all kinds of stuff. I saw him try to run my mother over while she was holding my 3-year-old half-sister. He was just a piece of shit who was lazy and wouldn't bring his paychecks home. I was 17 supporting my mom and sisters because of him. Not that I minded doing it, it's just the point that I shouldn't have had to. I should have been saving up for my own place. Anyway, I don't mean to make this about me. I'm sorry that you had to relive all of that. Hugs. My God, dude, that just sucks, and I hope to God that that man rots in the darkest pit of hell for what he did to you and you mother far though. I was on the verge of crying while reading this because it is just heartbreaking hearing about the people who are just the worst POS to others because of their own habits. I am so sorry that you had to go through that, and I hope that you can continue the rest of your life without ever needing to experience that kind of trauma again. My mom had this crazy alcoholic boyfriend named John for a long time when I was a kid between the ages of 5-9. He was nice enough. But like your mom, my mom worked a lot and a lot of times I was home alone with him. He taught me how to shuffle a deck of cards and mix him gin and tonics, but when we were playing cards on the coffee table in the family room, him sitting on the couch and I would sit on the floor opposite the coffee table, he would expose himself to me. He would wear jeans with a hole in the crotch and no underwear, or a robe with nothing on underneath. I would be so uncomfortable and always try to keep my head on my cards. It was sick, made me feel horrible, and I also never told anyone. This went on for a while, and then my mom and him got engaged and he moved in. He never touched me but would say inappropriate things and would show me his private parts. I learned years later in therapy that this was sexual abuse, even if the perpetrator doesn't physically touch you. This went on for a few years. Finally, after a fight, my mom took off her engagement ring and threw it in the woods behind my house and kicked him out. My mom went on to date some more men, all were odd, some were cool, but at least none of them were ever inappropriate with me. I never told my mom or my biological father. My parents had split custody, so growing up the half of the week I was with my dad, I was safe at least, and I carried this secret with me into adulthood. Long story short, John had a girlfriend after my mom and sexually abused her 3 children, and has been in prison for the last 20 years, and I think he has some more years to go. I never told me dad, but my therapist explained to me that it was important. I tell my mom what happened with John so many years ago. I told her. We cried, she said sorry, and that she wished I had told her. I wish I did too. I'm sorry for the long reply. I never told this to anyone but my mom. But I say all of that to say this. I think you should tell your mom. You were a child when your stepfather did that, and it is not your burden to bear. Even if your mom is upset and feels guilty about it, that's okay, she can work through it. But for your own peace, and to give yourself and your inner child closure, I think it's important to have that conversation, even if it's a really difficult one. I'm now an adult in my 30s, and after I told my mom, I felt a sense of peace and freedom I needed for so long. I didn't really think about it all very much, and didn't realize how much it was still affecting me. I hope you can talk to your mom, and I wish you peace and happiness. No one should suffer in silence. Thank you for sharing your story with us, and thanks for reading mine. I have a secret fantasy life populated with imaginary friends. It started in grade school, and I have continued all my life. I am in my 50s now, and still prefer to be alone in my imaginary world, instead of being with family or friends. I can't even tell my psychiatrist because I am afraid he will lock me up, or give me drugs to make it all stop. Last Christmas, Eileen, my sister, and I don't have the same father and are technically half-sisters. My sister's biological father tried to start a relationship with my mom that resulted in a pregnancy and ultimately didn't work out. That biological father is dead now, but I didn't probe any further about his identity or how he died in case it was something traumatic for my mom to remember. So she raised my sister as a single mother at my grandma's house in the 80s. Then she met my father and they started dating, and it worked out because they got married in the 90s, moved into a new house, and a short time after that I was born. She told me never call my sister my half-sister, and just pretend all of this doesn't matter, because she's my sister, and I'm keeping it that way. And if anyone asks about the 10-year age gap, I just tell them, it's a long story. I'm the spitting image of my grandpa on my dad's side. Both my parents are almost a foot shorter than me, but I'm almost the same height as him. When my mother got sick when I was a kid, my grandpa went to visit her daily for extended periods of time in the hospital. In his final months, she did the same. After he passed, we found out he kept a whole other family on the side in secret too. Looking back at my dad's military deployment history, it would also be dicey, as she could have gotten pregnant by him round the appropriate time. Based on a collection of various hunches, I'm fairly convinced I'm the product of an affair between my mother and supposed grandfather. More disturbingly, this would probably be one of the most lighthearted revelations about my family. When I was 16, conspired with a heroin addict I met online to help me off myself with heroin and dump my body in a dumpster in exchange for my valuables. I lived in a small town, and he was in a bigger city where my school had an upcoming trip. We planned for me to slip away during the trip and meet up with him to do the deed. He chickened out last minute and ghosted me. When I was young, probably around age 9 or 10, I was walking home with my dog from a house around the block when he cut the corner and walked diagonally through the yard of this super mean old lady who lived at the end of your street. She was in her yard at the time tending to these really fancy looking rose bushes she had growing in beds along the border with her neighbor. My dog was a very friendly golden retriever who didn't even really come near her, and certainly didn't do anything threatening, but she sprayed the faff out of him with some kind of insecticide or other chemical she was using on her roses. I ran back home with the dog and hosed him off. He coughed a bunch, but seemed otherwise fine. I didn't tell my parents because somehow thought I was going to get into trouble for letting the dog walk in her yard. I'm glad I didn't tell them though, because I decided that night to sneak downstairs out the half-bath window and down the street to her yard, where I cut down every goddamn rose bush I could get my hands on. I'm convinced a neighbor poisoned our family dog. We got her when I was in second grade. The poisoning happened when I was in college. They left notes on our door threatening to hurt the dog if she tea in their yard again, but our dog never went to their yard. Anyhow, she fell very ill very fast. She was in intense pain from her insides. She'd let out screams in pain. I don't know if you have ever heard a dog scream. That's the best I can describe it. It wasn't a cry, howl, or bark. It was a haunting scream. She couldn't get comfortable. I'd hold her to try to comfort her, and she'd be okay for a few seconds, and then another scream. We had to put her down. It was the only humane thing to do. I was devastated. It was like losing a sibling. It still hurts, and this was almost 20 years ago. Not long after that, our area had a natural disaster. The whole city was flooded. We moved back in pretty quickly because my dad was a carpenter, but most people took longer to return, including that neighbor. Let's just say every snake, reptile, rat, or any other nasty creature that my crazy dad came across, and there was a lot due to the disaster, was brought straight to their yard and inside their house. For months, I smiled to imagine the house of horrors that they returned to. It still wasn't enough though. In another world, I'd love to burn them inside their house. But alas, civilization. My neighbor gave me a dog when I was 6, asked for it back, and when my grandma said no, we wouldn't give the dog back because I was already attached to it. She had her son run my dog over, literally while I was holding the leash, swerved off the road onto the sidewalk, and he almost hit me in the process. I watched my dog get run over, and then she ran to the back of our house, and I watched her bleed out internally and externally for hours because we didn't have enough money for a vet or a gun to put her down. I sat with her until she died. I watched all dogs go to heaven for like a month straight and still cry when I think about it. Rest in peace, Care Bear. They did a really horrible thing, but you are right to give civilization as the reason not to take revenge. If people carried out their personal vendettas, especially if they are not sure or don't have much evidence, then our world would be a much more violent and chaotic one. That is why we have laws, police, and courts. Anyone who says different I would regard with doubt, as they are threatening the whole basis of our lives. Laws are not just there to protect us from crimes, but also from total social disorder. I always say though that someone who carries out a terrible crime, I believe, harms their own soul. I don't necessarily mean they are sorry or feel guilt, but that they are damaging themselves as a person in their most essential part. Not everyone would agree, but I think this is always the punishment for evildoers, even if they are not brought to justice. When I was about 15, I was one of those rebellious kids who never wanted to be at home, and had a best friend. This friend, oh fine, had a cat, and it wasn't like special or anything. I'm not into cats, but otherwise an animal lover. The cat apparently got into the neighbor's garden, and like would spray around the property. This old lady decided to shoot the cat with the BB gun. Had a BB dented into the side of her head. We were pissed, but knowing nobody would do anything about it, my friend and I decided to destroy her garden. This lady's garden wasn't huge but had expensive flowers, and could tell it's a lot of upkeep. It's honestly all she ever did. That night, we put masks on and filled spray bottles with bleach and snuck over to her property and sprayed her entire garden. 2-3 days go by and my buddy and I are walking the street to my apartment, which was just down the street from his house, and we see the old lady talking to a few cops, and she points at us while talking to the cops, which in return did nothing. And as we get in view of her garden, we see everything just weak and dying, and most the plants dead already. Felt nice to get back at her because this wasn't the first time she shot at the cat, but after that, she stopped. On the one side are kids angry at their cat being shot, and then on the other a neighbor with the garden destroyed. If both start taking more and more extreme measures of revenge, then this could degenerate into a brutal feud which might even cost someone their life. Always taking the law into your own hands risks unintended consequences. Suppose the cat had died, or the neighbor had a heart attack after seeing the destroyed garden, or had been burnt by bleach, or in the land of gun crazies, she thought her home was invaded, which technically it was, and shot one of the kids. But people thirsting for vengeance do not think of this or of the terrible state of anarchy that would exist if everyone was allowed to take revenge as they like. Be grateful you live in a civilized society with laws to prevent this kind of chaos. You walk through her yard, Your dog clearly went close enough to be sprayed. Some of us may have irrational fear of dogs that cannot be controlled. She sprayed him in self-defense, maybe thought he wanted to bite her, and you decide to voluntarily destroy plants dear to her. That took years to grow just because you're mean like that. You were really unfair on all Kessels. Went in her territory, let the dog run to her close enough to be sprayed, so probably 20-30 cm distance, and then you decide to destroy probably her only joy. Wow. And you're the hero of entitled people clearly who only want to be petty, not even thinking of right and wrong in life. But what goes around comes around, I guess. I truly hate injustice. When I was a teenager, worked at a novelty tourist shop near me. Being the idiot that I was, I stole a wad of cash from the store. It was $100 in ones. I told nobody, but they knew it was missing. Right about the same time, a coworker who was always trying to get me fired was telling someone she got about $100 in tips from her other job. They ended up firing her because they didn't trust that it wasn't her. Not super dark, but mine is also stealing from my employer. It was a seasonal job and they told people if you came back next season, you'd get a raise. Next season, got a 50-cent per hour raise, and mentioned it to a couple other people who had also returned, who it turned out didn't get a raise. They went and complained to the boss, who then took my raise back and gave them each 25-cent raises. I argued with the boss for a bit, but eventually just decided I'd steal a few bucks per shift to make up the difference. I worked at a Pizza Hut a while back. Had been there a couple years, making $7.75. I liked the job though, so I didn't care much. Boss hired another guy next to no experience, and I saw on his hiring papers that he was coming in at $8.25. I was frustrated but didn't know if I could say anything. I mentioned it to the assistant manager. Both her and the manager had been there about 15 years. She stopped what she was doing, asked the manager to come outside, and I heard her just rip the guy apart. He came in and shortly after asked me to come out back to sign papers saying I would be making $8.5 after that.